A 7-year-old boy named Liam vanishes mysteriously from a small coastal town in Maine, USA. For 13 years, no trace of him is found. The case turns cold, devastating his family and baffling authorities. Then a strange discovery is made off the coast of France, in the cold Atlantic waters, hinting that Liam survived, rescued and hidden by a mysterious man who lives in an isolated, man-made structure beneath the ocean. Before we dive into this gripping story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you love stories packed with mystery and drama, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. There's so much more coming your way. The early morning fog hugged the small coastal town of Hampton Bay, Maine, like a thick, cold blanket. The salty scent of the Atlantic Ocean seeped into every corner, drifting through narrow streets, curling around weathered clapboard houses, and slipping past the shuttered windows of the old lighthouse that stood watch over the rocky shore. The sun struggled behind a shroud of gray mist, its weak light barely reaching the damp cobblestones and slick wooden docks. Seagulls called mournfully, their cries echoing against the endless expanse of churning water. The ocean's breath was restless that day, a low, constant roar of waves breaking on jagged rocks and swirling tide pools. On the edge of the weather-beaten pier, a small figure darted between crates and fishing nets. Liam Harper, 7 years old, with wild curls the color of autumn chestnuts and eyes the pale blue of the sea in sunlight, chased after his scruffy terrier, Max. The boy's breath came in excited puffs, and his laughter rang sharp and clear against the murmur of the waves. Liam's blue jacket, worn but cherished, the kind his mother had stitched the initials into the collar, flapped in the salty wind. Today was a rare day off from school, and he was determined to explore every inch of the coast he loved so much. Max barked suddenly, sprinting ahead toward the rocky shoreline where the tide was pulling back, exposing dark, slippery rocks and shallow pools shimmering with tiny fish. Liam scrambled after him, careful but curious. The fog thickened, swallowing the shapes of the distant fishing boats bobbing on the horizon. The sharp scent of seaweed and brine filled the air, and the sound of the waves grew louder, more insistent. Liam knelt down by a tide pool, fascinated by the miniature world beneath the water's glassy surface, starfish clinging to rocks, crabs scuttling in and out of crevices, and little glimmers of sunlight reflecting off slick stones. Max whimpered and then barked louder, his eyes fixed on the water just beyond the rocky shore. Liam followed his gaze, spotting something shimmering beneath the waves, a flash of silver, too quick to catch, like a secret hiding just out of reach. Without thinking, Liam stepped closer to the edge of the rocks, trying to see better. Suddenly, his foot slipped on a slick patch of seaweed. For a moment, everything seemed to hang still, the cold air, the gray sky, the distant cries of the gulls. Then the icy Atlantic waters surged up, swallowing him. Max yelped, barking frantically as Liam disappeared beneath the turbulent surface. Down on the pier, a few early risers turned toward the sudden commotion. A fisherman called out, a woman gasped, and a dozen hearts stopped for a heartbeat. Sarah Harper, Liam's mother, was just returning from the bakery, a bag of fresh rolls tucked under her arm. Her eyes caught the frantic barking of Max, the sudden rush of neighbors toward the shoreline. Her heart thudded in her chest. "Liam," she called, voice cracking. No answer. She ran, breath catching, to the edge of the water, her feet slipping on the wet stones. The ocean was merciless, dark and cold, swallowing all sound except the crashing of the waves. She scanned desperately, the salty spray stinging her eyes. There was nothing but endless gray. The rescue teams arrived minutes later, their searchlights piercing the fog, scanning the restless sea. The Coast Guard boats hummed quietly in the bay, their engines steady but tense. Divers plunged beneath the surface, combing the underwater caves and jagged rocks. But the ocean had taken Liam, and for now, it kept it secret. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, the town gathered for a vigil. Candles flickered in the damp breeze, casting fragile light against the darkened sky. Neighbors held hands, faces pale and hopeful, praying for a miracle. Sarah clung to David, her husband, whose jaw was clenched tight, eyes hollow. The town of Hampton Bay waited, suspended in that cruel, liminal moment between hope and despair. And somewhere beneath the restless waves, a secret waited, a secret that would shatter everything they thought they knew about Liam's disappearance. The days that followed Liam's disappearance bled into a bleak blur, a fog of anguish and desperate hope that refused to lift. Hampton Bay, a quiet town where everyone knew everyone, was gripped by a collective unease. The sea, which had once been a source of comfort and livelihood, now seemed a dark and merciless force. Morning light spilled weakly over the horizon, casting pale pinks and grays across the restless Atlantic. The fishermen set out, their boats slicing through waves still heavy with night's chill, but their faces were hollow, eyes often drifting back toward the shore, toward the spot where Liam had vanished. Sarah Harper was unrecognizable. Her once bright eyes were shadowed by sleepless nights, her hands trembled with exhaustion. Each morning, she rose before dawn, clutching Liam's worn blue jacket like a lifeline, replaying every detail of that terrible day over and over. "I shouldn't have let him go near the water," she whispered to herself, the words like stones in her throat. David, her husband, buried himself in anything to avoid the unbearable silence. He spent hours at the harbor, talking to anyone who might have seen something, a flash of a small boy, a ripple in the waves. The local police encouraged patience, but even they felt the weight of impossibility pressing down. Search parties formed. Neighbors, friends, even strangers who had heard the news showed up with boats, flashlights, and warm blankets. They combed the jagged coastline, waded through the cold surf, peered into every tide pool and cave. But the ocean gave no answers. The Coast Guard deployed divers to scour beneath the waves. The underwater caves nearby were treacherous, filled with swirling currents and dark crevices that swallowed light like hungry mouths. The divers emerged pale-faced, shaking their heads. "Nothing," one of them said grimly. "No sign of the boy. It's like he was never here." The media caught wind of the story and arrived in full force. Television cameras lined the streets, reporters whispered to each other behind microphones, and the story of Liam Harper, the boy lost to the sea, spread like wildfire. Mystery of the missing boy. Where is Liam Harper? 7-year-old vanishes near rocky coastline in Maine. Search continues as hope fades. The posters of Liam's face, those big blue eyes, that infectious smile, were plastered everywhere. On telephone poles, storefront windows, community bulletin boards. Sarah made a desperate plea on local news, her voice breaking. "If anyone has seen my son, please, please come forward. He's all I have." At night, she was haunted by dreams. Dreams of Liam's voice calling to her across the crashing waves. Dreams of shadows moving beneath the water's surface. Dreams of a small hand reaching out, just beyond her grasp. David tried to hold the family together but found himself slipping into silence and long stares out at the horizon. Friends whispered about how the loss was tearing them apart, how grief was an ocean all its own, vast and crushing. Meanwhile, in the cold corridors of the police station, the case was carefully documented, filed away in growing stacks of reports and witness statements. Detective Mark Reynolds, a man seasoned by years of difficult cases, felt the weight of the Harper case more than most. His gray eyes were tired but determined. "There's something about this one," he confided to a colleague. "This boy's disappearance, it doesn't add up. No witnesses, no footprints, no clues. It's like he vanished into thin air." Days turned into weeks. Weeks stretched into months. The search parties dwindled, the news cycle moved on, but Sarah and David's lives remained frozen in that unbearable moment, the moment when the sea took their son. But somewhere, far beneath the surface of the Atlantic, the story was only beginning. Winter came to Hampton Bay like a silent thief, cloaking the town in brittle frost and biting winds. The ocean, once restless and loud, calmed into a muted gray expanse, mirroring the hollow ache that lingered in every home. Sarah sat by the window of the small, creaky house they'd called home for years. The pale morning light filtered through frost-streaked glass, casting fractured patterns on the wooden floorboards. The silence around her was suffocating, broken only by the faint creak of the old rocking chair and the distant cry of a lone gull. Her hands, once steady and strong, now shook as she traced the embroidered initials on Liam's jacket. A ritual she repeated daily, a desperate attempt to hold on to the tangible when everything else was slipping away. "David," she whispered into the cold room, but he was already gone, lost in his own solitude. The town had moved on, but Sarah's world had shrunk to memories and unanswered questions. Meanwhile, miles offshore, beneath the ocean's surface, something ancient stirred. A massive, dark structure lay hidden deep beneath the waves, a sprawling labyrinth of steel and glass, illuminated by eerie, bioluminescent lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. It was a man-made city, abandoned and forgotten, swallowed by the ocean decades ago after a secret government experiment went awry. Rumors had long swirled among the scientific community and conspiracy theorists alike. Strange disappearances, inexplicable sonar readings, and whispers of a hidden refuge beneath the sea. Few believed the tales. Fewer still dared to investigate. But Detective Mark Reynolds had never dismissed the impossible. Late one night, he sat in his cramped office, scrolling through old, classified reports he had quietly obtained, documents hinting at a project known only as Oceanus. According to the files, Oceanus was an ambitious underwater habitat designed to study marine life and develop new technologies. The project was abruptly terminated after a mysterious accident in the mid-1990s. The final report was chilling. All personnel accounted for except for one missing child. The child was presumed lost during evacuation. Mark's breath caught. The date matched. The location was close to Hampton Bay. His instincts screamed that Liam's disappearance was connected. Across the Atlantic, in a quiet town in Normandy, France, a marine biologist named Elise Dubois was also drawn into the mystery. She had recently detected strange signals emanating from deep beneath the ocean, pulses of energy that defied explanation. Elise's team had planned an expedition to investigate, unaware that their journey would lead them to secrets darker than the ocean's depths. Back in Hampton Bay, Sarah's dreams grew stranger, visions of a boy trapped in an underwater labyrinth, a beacon calling him home, and a shadowy figure watching from the depths. One morning, she awoke to find a small, water-worn pendant on her windowsill, a pendant shaped like a starfish, with faint engravings she didn't recognize. Was it a message? A clue? Or a cruel trick of the sea? As winter deepened, the threads of a long-hidden truth began to unravel, a truth that would cross oceans, span continents, and challenge everything the Harpers believed. Because Liam was not just lost. He was waiting. The chill of early spring did little to thaw the grief gripping Hampton Bay. Sarah Harper sat alone in her dimly lit kitchen, the water-worn pendant cradled in her palm. Its cold surface was smooth, worn by time and tides, unlike anything she had ever seen. Outside, the wind rattled the aging window panes, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and seaweed. The distant crash of waves against the rocky shore was a constant reminder of the boy she had lost, or so she thought. Far below the restless Atlantic, in the hidden depths of the underwater city, a figure stirred. He called himself Marek, a man unlike any other, part survivor, part mystery. Marek's story began decades earlier, when he was a young marine engineer on the Oceanus project. The accident had left him stranded beneath the waves, trapped in the vast submerged labyrinth. Over the years, he adapted to the silent world, learning its secrets, surviving its dangers. His pale eyes reflected the eerie glow of bioluminescent algae that carpeted the walls of the city's tunnels. His skin, weathered and marked by time underwater, told a story of endurance and solitude. But Marek was not alone. He had found Liam, a frightened boy lost to the sea, drifting into the depths during the chaos of evacuation. Marek rescued him, cradling him like a fragile ember of hope. For 13 years, Marek protected Liam, raising him in the cold, shadowed halls beneath the ocean. Liam grew, his hair darkened, his eyes still holding a flicker of the boy who had once chased a dog along the rocky shore. He learned to navigate the underwater city's maze, to read its strange signals, to survive where no one should. Yet, Marek knew that the world above had moved on, leaving them behind like ghosts beneath the waves. Now, with signs of activity stirring in the surface world, scientists preparing to investigate the mysterious signals, A detective piecing together forgotten files, Merrick faced a choice. Should he reveal the truth? Risk the fragile sanctuary he had built? Or let Liam remain lost forever? Back on land, Detective Mark Reynolds pored over the files, piecing together the puzzle. A pattern emerged, a series of disappearances along the Atlantic coast, all linked to Oceanus. He made a call to Elise Dubois in Normandy, sharing his findings. Elise listened intently, her curiosity and professional instincts ignited. Together, they began to plan an expedition that could finally uncover the truth buried beneath the waves. But in the shadows, forces stirred, those who had long sought to keep Oceanus a secret. Their eyes watched from hidden depths, their hands poised to silence anyone who got too close. And somewhere between the ocean's surface and its abyss, Liam's fate hung in the balance. The sky above Hampton Bay was a heavy, bruised gray as the first tendrils of a storm rolled in from the Atlantic. Rain began to fall in cold sheets, tapping relentlessly against the windows of the Harper home. Inside, Sarah wrapped the water-worn starfish pendant in a piece of soft cloth, a fragile talisman against the endless void. Far from the quiet despair of the town, a sleek research vessel cut through the choppy waters, its hull gleaming beneath flickering lanterns. On board, Dr. Elise Dubois prepared her team for the dive into the unknown. The expedition was a bold one, to descend into the depths where sonar signals hinted at artificial structures, long believed lost to history. Elise's voice was steady but tinged with excitement as she briefed her crew in the cramped laboratory. Whatever lies beneath, we're on the cusp of discovery or danger. This could rewrite our understanding of the ocean and ourselves. Back in Hampton Bay, Detective Mark Reynolds received a coded message from an unknown source. Be careful who you trust. The past is not dead. The warning echoed ominously in his mind. Someone was watching, someone who wanted the Oceanus secrets buried forever. At the harbor, David Harper stood by the dock, staring out at the restless sea. The storm was coming, and with it, a tide of revelations neither he nor Sarah could have imagined. As night fell, the research vessel anchored near the coordinates of the sunken city. The water churned beneath, concealing the cold steel maze Merrick and Liam called home. Below, Merrick watched the faint lights from the surface like distant stars, his heart heavy with hope and fear. And somewhere, in the silent halls of Oceanus, Liam's eyes opened wide, ready to face a world he had only dreamed of. The research submersible shuddered as it peeled away from the surface vessel, plunging into the cold, dark embrace of the Atlantic. Outside the thick, reinforced glass, the ocean's twilight faded rapidly, replaced by an abyssal blackness broken only by beams of artificial light. Inside, Elisa's breath came steady but shallow, eyes glued to the monitors tracking their descent. Every flicker on the sonar was a whisper of the unknown, strange shapes, angular lines, unmistakably artificial. The temperature dropped sharply, and pressure alarms beeped softly. Yet the submersible pressed onward, deeper than any had dared to explore this part of the ocean in decades. A sudden jolt startled the crew. The vessel had touched down on the ocean floor. Outside, through the viewing windows, the crew glimpsed something almost impossible: the sprawling ruins of an underwater city, its skeletal towers encrusted with coral, shimmering with bioluminescent life. The ghostly glow illuminated corridors and chambers that stretched into endless darkness. Elisa's heart pounded. We found it. Oceanus. But as they prepared to exit the submersible, the eerie silence was broken by a faint, rhythmic tapping, like a heartbeat echoing through the metal labyrinth. Merrick, watching from the shadows below, felt a pulse of fear and hope. The surface had found them. Suddenly, the tapping stopped. The silence was deeper now, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Then, a shadow moved just beyond the lights, fleeting and elusive. Liam, eyes wide with wonder and caution, the boy who had been lost to the ocean for 13 years stood at the edge of the ruins, watching the newcomers. The expedition had awoken a secret that refused to stay buried. The dim glow from the submersible's lights carved long, wavering shadows across the coral-encrusted walls of Oceanus. The water was cold, still, almost reverent. Inside the vessel, Elise and her team exchanged nervous glances, the weight of the moment settling on their shoulders like the crushing pressure outside. Suddenly, through the misty blue, a small figure emerged. Liam. His dark hair clung wetly to his forehead, eyes wide with a strange mixture of curiosity and fear. His movements were cautious, as if every step could shatter the fragile world he'd known beneath the waves. "Elise," one of her crew whispered, barely daring to breathe. The boy's gaze locked on the intruders, then flickered to Marek, the tall, pale man who stepped from the shadows. Marek's voice was rough but gentle. "Liam, it's safe." Liam hesitated, then slowly approached Marek, his eyes drifting toward the strange, foreign faces inside the submersible. Elise held out a hand, voice soft and steady. "We're here to help you." For a moment, the ocean seemed to hold its breath. Then, Liam took a trembling step forward. Back on the surface, the storm raged, mirroring the turmoil beneath. The lines between past and present blurred, secrets surged like the tide, and a rescue mission became a reckoning. Because beneath the waves, Liam's return would unravel mysteries no one was prepared to face. Liam blinked against the harsh glare of sunlight filtering through the thick glass of the submersible. The ocean's endless blue had given way to walls, colors, smells, a world that was both strange and overwhelming. His heart hammered as sensations crashed over him, the sharp tang of salty air, the buzz of electricity from the equipment, and the gentle hum of voices speaking in languages he barely understood. Marek stood close behind him, a steady anchor amid the chaos. "This is your world now," he said quietly. Liam's small hands pressed against the cold glass, his breath fogging the surface as he peered out at the team bustling on the research vessel above. Each face told a story, hope, fear, questions, and Liam felt like an alien trapped between two realities. Back in Hampton Bay, Sarah Harper sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. The pendant rested on the dashboard, gleaming faintly in the evening light. She didn't know it yet, but the boy lost for 13 years was coming home. Meanwhile, Detective Reynolds received a cryptic phone call from a voice cloaked in static. "The ocean keeps its secrets, Detective, but sometimes it lets them go." The game was changing. Above and below the waves, destinies intertwined, and the fragile hope of a family reunited was shadowed by secrets darker than the ocean's depths. The sterile light of the research vessel's lab was harsh, but Liam barely noticed. His mind was a tempest, memories of endless dark corridors, strange glowing fish, and Marek's quiet voice all tangled with the sharp new sensations of solid ground, faces, and sounds. He sat curled in a corner, hands trembling as fragments of his childhood flickered like shadows, chasing a dog on rocky shores, laughter in sun-dappled parks, then the sudden, terrifying plunge into cold, unforgiving waters. Marek stood nearby, watching silently. His eyes, once fierce and resolute, now showed cracks of exhaustion and regret. 13 years trapped beneath the ocean had taken their toll. "Elise," Marek's voice was low, "there's something you need to know. Oceanus was never just an experiment." Elise looked up, brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Before Marek could answer, a piercing alarm shattered the room. The submersible systems flashed warnings. Unauthorized signals were detected nearby. Outside, shadows flickered beneath the waves, signs that they were not alone. Detective Reynolds stared at the map on his screen. The disappearances, the secret underwater city, and now strange signals. It was all connected. Someone was watching the expedition, and their motives were dark. In the quiet moments before the storm hit again, Liam closed his eyes, caught between two worlds, wondering if he could ever belong to either. The waves outside the research vessel hammered like thunder against the hull, the storm now a full tempest roaring over Hampton Bay. Inside, the air was thick with unease, every creak and groan of the ship amplified by the mounting tension. Elise paced the cramped command room, her mind racing to interpret the signals that had disrupted their equipment. "It's not a glitch," she said firmly. "Someone, or something, is down there." Marek's gaze darkened. "They don't want Oceanus found. Not the way we do." In the shadows of the city, far below the ocean's surface, figures watched with cold precision. Cloaked in stealth technology that shimmered like liquid mercury, They monitored every movement of the expedition. "We have the boy," a voice whispered, rough and low. "Keep the surface dogs away. The secret must remain buried." Back on the ship, Liam sat alone, the weight of years pressing on his small shoulders. Memories collided, flashes of a man with kind eyes who had saved him, and another with cold ones who chased him through endless dark corridors. Suddenly, the submersible's lights flickered, then went out completely. A hush fell over the crew. "Power's down," a technician shouted. "We're blind down there." Panic rippled through the vessel like an electric current. The ocean was no longer just a mystery, it was a trap. Outside, the watchers smiled behind their masks, their mission clear. Oceanus would stay hidden, and Liam's story would end in silence. The submersible was swallowed by darkness, the sudden loss of power turning the high-tech vessel into a fragile coffin drifting in the abyss. Outside, the ocean was a crushing black, the silence complete except for the panicked breaths and whispered prayers of the crew. Elisa's fingers danced over the emergency controls, her voice steady but urgent. "We need to get the backup systems online. Merrick, can you?" Marek's pale face was lit only by the dim glow of his console. His hands trembled as he worked to reroute power, but beneath his focus was a storm of memories. Images of a man he once called father, experiments that turned from science to obsession, and the fateful day he was trapped beneath the waves. "I'm trying," he said, voice tight. "This place, it's more than a city. It's a prison." In the control room aboard the surface ship, tension was mounting. The crew had lost contact with the submersible. Sarah Harper gripped the edge of the console, clutching the starfish pendant. "Liam is down there," she whispered. "We have to find him." Detective Reynolds worked furiously to triangulate their position, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Someone is interfering with the signals. It's deliberate." Suddenly, the submersible jolted violently, dragging the crew into a harsh, uneven sway. "We're caught in a current, something's pulling us," Elise shouted. Below the waves, Marek's eyes flickered with determination. "Hold on. I know this place. I can get us out." But the darkness was closing in, secrets deeper than the ocean's floor threatening to drag them all under. The submersible lurched as it was dragged through twisting underwater tunnels, the walls of Oceanus pressing close like the ribs of a long-dead beast. Every jolt sent shivers through the crew's bones. Elise gritted her teeth, clutching the console as the vessel rocked violently. "Merrick, where are you taking us?" Marek's eyes were fixed ahead, pale and haunted. "Somewhere safe. But you need to know the truth." His voice lowered, shaking. Oceanus was a secret project, meant to be a refuge during the Cold War. Governments poured billions into building this underwater city to survive nuclear fallout. But things went wrong. He paused, swallowing hard. "My father was one of the lead scientists. But he became obsessed, locked himself and others inside to protect the project's secrets. The city was sealed off, forgotten, a tomb." The crew listened in stunned silence. Outside, the water pressure crushed silently against the vessel, as if the ocean itself was trying to silence the story. "And me?" Elise whispered. "Where do I fit?" Marek's eyes flickered with pain. "I was trapped here as a child, just like Liam. I've been trying to escape ever since." Suddenly, the submersible shuddered violently, a distant rumble echoing through the water. "Something's coming," Merrick warned. "We don't have much time." Outside, in the inky blackness, shapes moved fast, hunters from the deep, determined to keep Oceanus' secrets buried forever. Inside, the line between past and present blurred. For Merrick and Liam, the ocean was no longer just a prison, it was a battleground. The submersible shuddered again, this time violently, as if the ocean itself was shaking with rage. The thick steel walls creaked under pressure, groaning like a dying beast. Elisa's breath hitched. "We're not just trapped, something is hunting us." Outside, the murky water swirled with ominous shapes, silent, fast-moving shadows weaving through the wreckage of Oceanus like ghosts of a forgotten war. Merrick gripped the controls with white-knuckled intensity. "They don't want anyone leaving. Not alive." Liam pressed close to Merrick, eyes wide with a terror that no child should know. Yet beneath his fear burned a flicker of fierce hope, the first in over a decade. "Hold on," Merrick whispered as he maneuvered the submersible through a narrow underwater tunnel. The walls seemed to close in, the dark pressing close enough to touch. Suddenly, a sharp bang rattled the vessel, a torpedo or some kind of underwater projectile. The lights flickered violently, alarms blaring. "Damage to the hull," shouted the engineer. Water began seeping in. Elisa's mind raced. "We need to surface. Now." But the ocean was a cage. Outside, the watchers tightened their net, relentless and merciless. Back on the surface, Sarah Harper clenched her fists, eyes burning with desperate hope and terror. The pendant on her dashboard seemed to pulse in the dim light, as if alive. Detective Reynolds stared at the incoming data, realization dawning. This isn't just a rescue. It's a war. Below the waves, in the darkness of Oceanus, a battle for survival had begun, and the ocean was a cruel judge. The submersible trembled as water pressure threatened to breach its hull. Alarms screamed a warning that no one dared ignore. Liam's small hands gripped Marek's arm. "We have to fight," he said, voice trembling but fierce. Marek looked down, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You're stronger than I thought, kid." Outside, shadowy figures in sleek, black suits closed in, weapons aimed and ready. They were trained, ruthless, and utterly determined to keep the ocean's secrets hidden forever. Elise took a deep breath, steadying herself. "We can't outrun them, but maybe we can outsmart them." The submersible dove deeper into the labyrinth of Oceanus, weaving through ruins of once glorious halls lit faintly by bioluminescent algae. Liam's memories flashed, of the glowing fish, the hum of machines, and Marek's quiet courage. He wasn't just a lost boy anymore. He was a survivor. Suddenly, the vessel jolted, and impact shook the floor. "We've been hit," shouted the engineer. Water was rushing in fast. Marek's hands flew over the controls, his jaw clenched. "Hold on. I'm taking us to the core, the power source of Oceanus. Maybe we can use it to escape." The darkness pressed in from all sides. The ocean had swallowed years, secrets, and lies, but in its heart lay a hope no one could extinguish. The submersible shuddered as Marek piloted it toward the glowing heart of Oceanus, a massive reactor chamber pulsating with eerie blue light, alive like the ocean itself.